Hey everybody, it's Kevin Mitchell, and today we're going to take a look at Phindle, which is a tool that I've created for generating Amazon Kindle Mobi-friendly files. There's quite a bit actually that goes into creating a well-formatted Mobi document or ebook. And Phindle takes out a lot of the effort, a lot of the sort of the nitty-gritty details. There's actually a number of XML documents that need to be generated in order to sort of use all the metadata that the Kindle supports. And again, I try to take as much of that as possible out of the use of this Phindle tool. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. There is one prereq for Phindle, and that is KindleGen. If you just Google KindleGen, it should be the first result. Certainly it's easy to find. And KindleGen is basically Amazon's command line tool for generating these files. And there's a version for Windows, for OS X, as well as Linux. And today I'm going to be running in a Vagrant powered Ubuntu virtual machine. So I'm using the Linux version, but certainly any of these versions should work with Phindle, no problem. You just have to make sure they're installed on your machine wherever you're going to be running Phindle. So I have it in use your local bin KindleGen. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing to do is we're going to actually use Composer, and we're going to start at the beginning here, but I'm not going to necessarily spend too much time covering Composer. And there's some things that we could do a little nicer and a little more elegantly. There's a class we're going to include that we're just going to require using PHP's require once as opposed to auto-loading it with Composer, that type of thing. Maybe not exactly following PSR 0 standards or any PSR standards for that matter. But hopefully for the purposes of this tutorial, which really is just about using Phindle, that's going to be okay, and hopefully you'll all forgive me. So we're going to go ahead and search for Phindle on Packagist here, and if you're not familiar, Packagist is well, here you go, the PHP package archive. And if we go ahead and click on Phindle, you can see there's a number of different versions. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and use the latest tagged version, which is version 0.2.1. And that's pretty much all we need from Packagist. There is more documentation available here on the GitHub page, but hopefully after watching this video you won't even need that. So here I'm using PHP Storm. This is my preferred IDE. You certainly don't have to use PHP Storm, and we're not using any of PHP Storm's functionality, so you know, no need to use this. Any IDE will work. And we're going to start by creating a composer.json file. And in here, we're going to require. That's it. So this is going to tell Composer to go ahead and download Phindle, generate an auto-load file, and download any dependencies, which as of now there are none. And then from the command line, let's make sure we're in the right directory, which we are. We're just going to run composer install. This is going to take a second, but hopefully not too long. And again, as I mentioned, this is just going through downloading any dependencies, which there should be none, and downloading from GitHub the Phindle tool. And once that's done, it will then generate an auto-load file. There we go. So we're all set now with the actual files that we need. As far as Phindle itself is concerned, we have a auto-load file here, and the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to create a new file. I'm going to call it index.php, and this is where we're going to do almost all of our work, is just in this index file. So we are, of course, today going to be using PHP, and we're going to require once this autoload file. So from the current directory, where we need to go into vendor, and we need to include autoload.php. Okay. I do have an htaccess file here, and this is just because the PHP installation I have is pretty simple, so no errors are displayed. I don't have them set up, so I just created an htaccess file here to make sure that I'm going to see any errors that I happen to create. So after that, we're going to go to randommobi.dev, which is the host that I have set up for this, and just to make sure a sanity check, we're going to echo hi. Good. So we are in the right spot. And there is one piece of code that I'm going to include that I wrote previously. And it's very simple, and we're going to look at it just to make sure that nothing crazy or anything too fancy is happening. And that is this custom content class. And the only reason I created this is just because we are generating an ebook, that is the goal, and we need some content. So rather than copy-paste big chunks of text, this custom content class basically does 4 things. It generates a random string, which is just not even a real word, of course, just a random bunch of characters. A random phrase, which is essentially a sentence. A random paragraph, which is essentially just a bunch of random phrases or sentences. And then a chapter. And what I'm calling chapter here, I'm using very loosely. Essentially, this is just a random number of paragraphs with an occasional random image inserted in between. And I'm inserting an image to show one of the features of Phindle, which is you'll notice that we have some URLs to Flickr, and we have some local images. That's the only other file I'm going to include that actually right now. And the reason I'm doing this is just to demonstrate how we can have, how Phindle is smart enough to automatically download any files that it needs to, and it can also use local files. So this is one of the real target sort of audiences, I guess, of Phindle is somebody who has a blog maybe or a website that has content that they want to put into a format that could easily be downloaded by somebody who has a Kindle and read on the go, that type of thing. And you know, for those people, myself being one of them, you know, you may have a lot of images that you know, maybe you're using a CDN, something like that for. And unfortunately, the Kindle Gen tool from Amazon requires absolute paths to all of the static resources. So rather than having to update maybe your HTML to have absolute paths, Phindle will do that automatically. And if you have images that are hosted remotely, then Phindle will also pull those down locally and store those for you. So this is why, long story short, we're including these images here. Okay, the next thing is to actually get started. After we require once this class that we just created, custom content.php, we're ready to get going. So I am actually going to grab one piece of code here which has a bunch of settings that we will include here, but don't worry, we're going to walk through these. The first thing to do is to create a new Phindle document. So you know, we can always do this. We can create a new Phindle document like so. And we don't actually need to pass any options in as a parameter to the constructor. However, then to complete that thought, you can set these. So you can call set attribute and set, for instance, the title to whatever we wanted to use. And at some point, I may move to using some of the PHP sort of magic methods to let you do something like set title. Right now, I don't think it's really necessary. So for now, I think that the easiest thing to do, and the thing I prefer to do, is just to pass all the configuration parameters in on the command line, or in the constructor, I'm sorry. And those include the title, which is pretty self-explanatory, publisher, which is the publisher, creator, which is another word here for author, the language. There's a number of languages that you can support. Most all of these are just metadata. Subject, description, path. Now path is important. Path is going to be the place that, as I say in this comment here, the temp files are going to be stored. So not only temporary files like the images that we discussed a second ago that are going to be downloaded, but also the actual final Mobi file is going to end up in this path. So you want to make sure it's somewhere that that's writable by PHP or by your web server. ISBN, static resource path. Similarly, this is the path to any static resources you might have. So this is different than the temporary path because the static resource path here is going to be the path to files that you may be linking to in your own HTML. So if you have images, maybe you've got an image directory, for instance, or a CSS directory that you use in your website. That would be the path, the actual absolute relative path, or the absolute path to those static resources. Cover is the image that we're going to use for the cover. So for us, I'm just going to use this image I have here, something from my Flickr account. Kindle gen path is pretty self-explanatory. We looked at that a second ago, and that's just the path to Kindle. So in my case, again, user local bin Kindle gen. And whether or not we want to download images. So if for some reason you don't want Phindle to try to download the static resources like images from remote servers, then you can set this to false. I certainly would recommend leaving it to true, assuming you want your images to show up. Okay, so once we have all these settings set up, the next thing to do is actually generate content. So let's, for now, we're going to just have a for loop. We'll start with 1 and we'll go to 30, like so. Yep. And all we need to do is basically insert a new content object into this Phindle document. So content is, there's a number of ways to do this, and what I'd recommend, especially to start, is just to use the supplied content class, instantiate the content class, which we're going to do right now. Developer Phindle, not table of contents, content. There we go. I think I didn't like that because we need a new developer Phindle content. There we go. And from there, all you really need to do is you need to set the actual HTML content of this content element, as well as the title of this particular content element. So that would be, to sort of make an analogy to the book that we're going to be generating, you can think of this content as a chapter in the book, the title being the title of the chapter, and the HTML basically being the body of the chapter. So we'll set the title here. And you know what we're going to go ahead and actually do is we're going to, before we do that, let's create a couple very simple functions. Get title and get HTML. And get title, we're going to instantiate this custom class we created. Custom class, custom content, custom content, return, we'll make a uppercase title case, custom content, get generate random phrase. There we go. So that'll give us a workable title, I guess. And then for the HTML, we will do basically the same thing. We'll just return custom content, generate chapter. Okay. And now we can actually set these in the content object here. Set title, get title, set HTML, get HTML. Okay, and then we'll take Phindle and we will add content. You'll notice that this just has to implement the content interface. So we'll talk a little bit more for a more sort of advanced way to do this. If you don't actually want to instantiate a new developer Phindle content object, you can actually use your own objects. Maybe it's a blog post object. And as long as your blog post object implements the content interface, then you can just directly add that to the Phindle document. And that actually gives you a lot of sort of flexibility, and it lets you sort of make these Phindle files a little more little more elegantly with a little less code. But for now, we're just going to add this content item. Okay, so the last thing we have to do, at this point we have a Phindle document. We've set all the basic metadata about it, and we've added a bunch of content. So the last thing to do is actually process this document. So just call process. And then we can, let's see, get Mobi path. Well, hopefully that'll give us the path to the Mobi file. Let's go ahead and refresh this. One more quick check actually, just to be sure. Metadata, creating 30 chapters, if you will. Instantiate a bunch of content objects. Process the Phindle, and spit out the Mobi path. Okay, see what happens. So one thing I forgot to do, I'm going to tell Composer to dump the autoload file and build a new optimized version. I think there we go. The path provided is not writable by PHP. Yes, that's true. There are a number of options, of course, we've set here. One of them is this path to this ebook directory. Turns out there is no ebook directory in this current folder, so it's not happy with that. Create an ebooks directory. Let's actually go ahead and open that up in Finder too. That looks better. Okay, so everything ran. We have a new Mobi file, and if you look inside of ebooks, you can see a couple things. One, here are the images that were downloaded by Phindle for us, and we have this Mobi file. So open that with Kindle Previewer. And just like that, we have a book. You can see that we have this NCX view, which is essentially one of these XML files that I mentioned earlier that are generated for us. And this happens automatically, taking the content, getting title and various other metadata, and building a chapter list. This obviously doesn't look great because the words are all gibberish, but it is a real index. There's actually a number of different types of indexes that Kindle supports. One of them is this NCX view, and one of them is a sort of a more traditional HTML view, just table of contents. And this is another way that you can, of course, find various pieces of content within your book. And then there's also a cover. So here's the image that you saw. It's probably not the best cover for a book, but the point is, it certainly works. And although it's outside of the scope of this video, I might make another video at some point. All these templates that are used to generate these pages can be supplied by yourself. So if you want to have a custom view, there's a lot of things where you can use CSS and so forth to change the look and feel of things. All these things are definitely 100% customizable. You just have to get a little deeper into the code, and you have to pass in different dependencies and implement some of your own renderers and so forth. But you certainly don't need to, and you'll already have a well-formatted book. So the last thing we'll do, at this point we've successfully generated a file, of course. But I mentioned that we can actually get away from having to instantiate a content object, and we can just generate our own, or we can implement the content interface, and that'll allow us to use our own objects without instantiating this content object. So we're going to go ahead and do that really quickly. There's a few methods that we're going to need to implement, and the way we're going to do this, we're just going to go straight into our custom content class here, and we're going to implement the developer Phindle content interface. And it's giving us an error because there's a number of methods that we need to implement. And I am going to use PHP Storm here to speed things up a little bit. I'm going to implement a constructor, get HTML, get position, get anchor path, get sections, get title, and get unique identifier. So a handful of methods. Most of these we don't actually need to do much work for though, so it should be relatively quick. We're going to have a private ID. For some reason it puts the constructor here on the bottom, but all we're going to do here is we're going to set the ID to a random number between that and that. And the reason for doing this is it's possible, and we'll talk through this as I go, but it's possible that your various chapters of your book may cross-reference each other. So you may want to have a link, for instance, from chapter 2 to a part of chapter 3. And to do that, Phindle, when it's generating all of these files, it needs to supply, in order to generate these surprisingly nice, although that doesn't necessarily look like it here again, but in order to generate these indexes and basically the list of various parts of your book, it needs to have some handle that it can use to identify each chapter and each section of your book. So that's why the content itself, we leave it up to you to generate the unique identifier. So that way you have the control within your book and within your HTML. You can basically just create an anchor tag that links to a particular chapter, and that should automatically work. Assuming, of course, that you implement get unique identifier and these various other methods that let Phindle know how exactly you're identifying your various content objects. So here we're just going to return ID. Oops, this ID. There we go. Get HTML. We're going to actually just we'll just return this. Generate chapter. Get title, again, we'll just steal this from here. And we don't need these any longer. So, turn this, generate random phrase. Okay, so this, for now, we're just actually going to go ahead and return this ID again. Now, what this allows us to do, as I was mentioned earlier, is if there's other identifiers, it lets you be in control of how exactly you internally are going to build these links. That way, if so, we'll do something like this actually, just to give you an example. But in your own content in the HTML, for instance, your blog, you may just use references like the pound symbol and then maybe the ID, for instance, of a particular section. And the Phindle tool doesn't necessarily know how you do that, so we have you, or rather the Phindle tool requires that you let it know how you want to build those anchor paths. Get position, we'll just return 1. Phindle will use this position when it's sorting the various content elements within your Phindle document. If you have a blog post and for some reason you're loading them from a database maybe, and for whatever reason the first blog post that's loaded is not the first chapter, if you will, of the Phindle document, then as long as, again, you implement this get position and return this correct position, then when Phindle, right before Phindle actually generates the Mobi file and before it generates all the indexes and so forth, it'll sort these based on the position. Again, just trying to give you control over where your content goes and how it interacts with other content. Get sections, a little bit of documentation and of course to do here, but this, long story short, just allows you, if you want, to provide sections within the chapter. So for instance, section 1.1 detail point. There is a format for this, and there's more documentation that demonstrates exactly how to do this if you would like to have sections. If not, then you can always just return null and you'll be all set. So that should be all we need actually. So we've implemented the constructor, get sections, get position, get anchor path, get title, get HTML, and get unique identifier. Okay, so it should be all set then. And if we refresh, call the undefined function getTitle. Of course, we need to actually not use this implementation, but we will use custom content. Okay, let's try that one more time. There we go, and success. So that's all you need to do if you want to use your own content objects. Just need to make sure you implement the content interface. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is to it. Thank you for watching.